December 6, 1941. Northern Oahu. Opana Ridge sits like a watchman above the Pacific, wind tearing at scrub and canvas. The little wooden shack on its shoulder smells of oil, sweat, and ozone. Inside, Privates Joseph Lockard and George Elliott kneel before a phosphor screen that casts them green in the half-light. The machine that makes that light, the SCR-270, is a crude god: 4 trucks of iron and vacuum tubes, 5,000 pounds of copper coils, switchgear, and waveguides, a gasoline generator thumping under the floor to feed the high-voltage plates. The transmitter kicks 15 kilovolts to its tubes and, in a pulse, spits out nearly 100 kilowatts of peak power into the night at roughly 106 MHz. Each pulse is a 1 to 20 microsecond screen. The sweep arm drags the trace around the cathode tube once every 10 seconds. The antenna outside, a Yagi mast some 50+ feet high with stacks of half-wave dipoles and reflectors, turns against the wind, each click of the rotator sounding like a clock marking seconds of fate. They know the manuals. At that wavelength, a roughly 2.8-meter wave, even a spinning propeller or a tailplane makes a readable return. They know the box's limits, too. In ordinary conditions, the system reliably detects formations out to about 150 miles and can resolve altitude signatures up to roughly 25,000 feet, with range precision that degrades to a few miles at extreme distance. But war is full of exceptions: air bends, and metal reflects. For nearly an hour the screen shows the ocean static, the little fuzz of noise that operators learn to ignore. Then at 7:02 a.m. the trace blooms. A single point becomes a cluster becomes a sash across the face of the scope. The echo grows thicker with each sweep, not as a handful of dots but as a stacked mass. The phosphor nearly saturates. Elliott leans in, hand trembling. "That's a lot of planes, Joe." Lockard fingers the range dial. Numbers lock in: 132 miles. North. Inbound. A formation the training charts never drew. They are short-staffed. This is a Sunday shift with 2 men where 5 are supposed to sit: 1 operator, 1 assistant, a maintenance corporal, a relay radio man, and a duty officer. That morning there are only 2. That human thinness tightens the danger. No redundancy, no second set of eyes, no procedure fully followed. Lockard knows the reporting chain: the field phone to Fort Shafter, the information center that should translate electronics into orders. But the center runs on routine, not terror, and the man on duty tonight is Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, a pilot filling a desk slot. Lockard calls. "Sir, large formation, 132 miles north, bearing in." Tyler replies after a pause, casual, tired. "Probably the B-17s from the mainland. Don't worry about it." The line goes dead. The words are a slap. Back on the scope, the returns are not randomly distributed. They show depth, multiple layers indicating many elements stacked in echelon. In the analog display, pulse timing is everything. Each echo time measures distance by the 12.36 microseconds it takes radio to travel 1 mile and back. Here, the sweep reads as a steady inward march: 120 miles, 190, and the amplitude climbs, not linearly but brutally, because at the forefront of a mass of aircraft the combined radar cross-section floods the receiver. At those ranges the signal falls with the square of distance, so the severity of the spike tells trained eyes this isn't a straight flight, this is force. They don't yet understand why it looks so far out. But later, after smoke cools and reports are stacked, engineers will point at a physics trick. The morning's thermal layers formed a duct, warm air floating over cooler ocean that bent VHF waves and carried them along the curvature of the Earth. The SCR-270, built to see 150 miles, was that morning skimming the sea and spying at nearly 300. The machine is working beyond its spec because the atmosphere borrowed its power. That one quirk of weather buys 55 minutes of warning. Time increments in 10-second sweeps. Each time the sweep returns, the mass is closer, and inside the shack the feeling tightens into a physical pressure. The generator's bearings whine. The Yagi's mount creaks. Lockard calls again, pressing the cadence of information into a phone line designed for clerks, not crisis. The message goes to a desk man with flight hours and no standing authority to scramble. Even if the officer believed it, there are other constraints. On the island, only a handful of fighters are immediately ready. A squadron's worth of P-40s might be fueled, 3 to 6 men per plane on duty in the hangar. But refueling, arming, getting airborne and climbing to intercept takes time. Interception windows are thin. Once a mass is 50 to 100 miles out, fighters with climb rates, headwinds and scramble prep have a 10 to 12 minute window to meet them. That window is a blade. At 7:39 the scope clears as the returns pass behind a ridge. Silence rushes into the shack like cold air. Lockard exhales, assuming the contact has passed. "Guess that's it," he says, the sentence sterile with fatigue, not fear. Then, 9 minutes later, the first arrival. The sky over Pearl Harbor ruptures. Aichi D3A, VALs, fall in screaming dives at 240 knots, their engines howling in the thin air, 1,200 horsepower concentrated into a few seconds of plunge. Nakajima B5N torpedo planes skim low and release Type 91 torpedoes specially adapted with wooden tail stabilizers, so they will not bury into Pearl's shallow 40-foot depth but will run true to strike hulls. The harbor becomes a controlled demolition. Battleships built to shrug off shells sink to boots height, oil boils, and fire paints the dawn the color of rust. On Opana Ridge the logbook still lies open on the bench, 702, large formation, 132 miles north, bearing in. The green phosphor trace is dead now, but the paper swallowing ink carries what the screen had screamed, a solid, time-stamped proof that the island had been warned. The radar saw the enemy. Command heard a shrug. Why did the warning die in the phone? There are reasons layered like sediment. Doctrine had not yet built direct links from independent radar outposts into fighter control. The standard operating procedure routed reports through bureaucracy. Operators were trained to expect weather clutter and ferry flights. And the scope picture, language, signal amplitude patterns, pulse clustering, was not yet common parlance among desk officers used to maps and pigeons. Even the instrument's own limitations fed distrust. A saturated tube trace could be dismissed as receiver overload, or a spurious echo from a radar calibration flight. The idea that the ocean itself could carry the beam further than designed seemed like a science fiction caveat. The human cost of that disbelief is immediate and tactile. Shards of shrapnel in gunners' arms, men sucked into water by explosions, steel plates folded like paper. The tactical details amplify the terror. Type, speed, and payload matter. A 250-kilogram bomb penetrates a wooden flight deck or thin superstructure and delays detonation fractions of a second, enough to explode inside, to chain react fires into magazines. A Type 91 torpedo carries a warhead designed to break keel and structure under oil-slicked fire. These aren't abstract numbers. They smell like burning paint and spilled diesel. When the first reports reach headquarters hours later, there is no neat accountability, only questions. The SCR-270 worked. The atmosphere extended its gaze. Men ignored the light. After the smoke, the military will do what militaries do: catalog, quantify, rewire. Technicians will rework antenna patterns, specify elevation beam width and side lobe suppression, improve receiver linearity to prevent blinding saturation, and push for a direct fighter warning circuit from remote sites into central command. They will note that the SCR-270's vertical beam width, a few degrees of elevation, sets what portion of the sky is prioritized, that the antenna's lobe pattern could miss a low slant approach unless the operator scanned elevation and azimuth with disciplined cadence, and that timing delays, the 2 to 3 minutes it took to verify, phone, and convince, are fatal when time compresses. But that calculus is later. On Opana Ridge, the antenna turns once more, catching only smoke and the smell of oil. The generator coughs and dies. The screen goes black. The island that had been seen, that had been warned, is burning. The machine that could have bought minutes, that could have knit men into action, sits quiet like a testimony. The war that follows will be an effort to make such tests of physics habitual, to build command links, to staff stations with the teams necessary to translate electronics into action. For now, though, the only certainty is the ledger of loss and the bitter knowledge that the future can scream in technical detail and still be ignored. 1943. The Pacific has turned into a chessboard of listening posts and antennas. After the shock of Pearl Harbor, America doesn't just rebuild ships, it rebuilds perception. From the Aleutians to the Marshalls, engineers, mathematicians, and radar operators form a new kind of front line, invisible, electric, made of pulses and echoes. The heart of this revolution is the SCR-270 successor, the SCR-271, a fixed-site radar using the same frequency band, around 106 MHz, but refined into steel towers with stabilized oscillators and better signal discrimination. Its operators can now read a formation 300 miles out, not perfectly, but early enough to matter. Where once a single station on Oahu stood alone, now a chain of radar outposts rises across the Pacific like a digital nervous system stretching over thousands of miles. At Adak Island, Alaska, radar crews work in ice and fog, their generator sheds trembling from the cold wind. The antenna is a lattice of dipoles 30 feet high, rotating by hand crank. Each rotation takes nearly 30 seconds. The phosphor on the screen glows faintly. Faint echoes from the Bering Sea scatter in patterns that look like snow. The operators learn to distinguish storm fronts from metal wings. One wrong judgment could cost hundreds of lives. The fear isn't of enemy planes, it's of missing them. Each radar beam pulses 621 times per second. The wavelength is nearly 10 feet. The return signal, delayed by microseconds, tells distance in miles. But the Pacific plays tricks with radio. Temperature layers bend the beam. Humidity refracts the pulse. Nightfall changes range by 20%. A signal that looks like distant weather can hide the shadow of a bomber group. Operators become part meteorologists, part priests, reading ghosts from static. In Hawaii, a new kind of command post emerges, the Information Center, a vast room beneath Hickam Field where radar plots converge. Technicians, mostly women trained from the Women's Army Corps, sit at plotting tables marking contacts with grease pencils. Lines arc over a map of the Pacific. At one end, a massive clock ticks in red light. Officers call out updates. Plot 42 confirmed. Heading 095. Speed 210. Radios hum, telephones chatter, voices rise and fall under the fluorescent hum. The war has become a geometry of seconds. Outside on Oahu's north shore, radar station Opana stands again, repaired, expanded, braced against another surprise. The operators who man it now are no longer the green boys of 1941. They've learned what their predecessors' warning cost. One of them, Sergeant James Connors, keeps a note pinned above his scope. If it moves, report it. If it doesn't, check again. Every morning, they test the system, calibrate the time base, align the antenna, sync the rotating beacon. The hum of transformers fills the hut. When a signal appears, a faint spike at 180 miles, drifting in, their training kicks in. Now, for the first time, the call doesn't stop at a single phone. The radar plots relay through radio circuits and teletype to the Fighter Control Center, then to the Interceptor Command. Within minutes, P-38s scramble from Wheeler Field. The gap that once doomed Pearl Harbor is closing. But it's not perfect. The Japanese adapt. Low-altitude flights, night approaches, radio silence. In the Solomon Islands, early radar crews face swarms of Betty bombers flying below 500 feet, under the radar's line of sight. Engineers respond by building the SCR-527, a low-altitude search radar using a 2.8-meter wavelength, mounted on mobile trucks and naval vessels. It can catch targets down to 100 feet above the sea, but only if the operators can filter out the sea clutter, the bright static of waves that looks exactly like noise. The men call it chasing ghosts through thunder. In one night intercept, a radar post on Guadalcanal picks up a faint blip moving at 180 knots, a Japanese G4M formation heading toward Henderson Field. The controller relays coordinates to a P-70 night fighter. The pilot flies blind, guided only by the radar's voice. Bearing 087, range 12, 10, 8. The blip merges with the aircraft's gun's sight. Tracers rip through the dark. When the burning bomber falls into the jungle, the radar room erupts, not in joy, but in exhausted disbelief. They've learned to kill by numbers on a phosphor screen. The network expands relentlessly. Radar stations bloom on coral atolls and jungle ridges. Generators roar, cables snake through mud, antennas sway under monsoon rain. Each site becomes both fortress and target, a node in the web of eyes. The operators live with two terrors, the fear of silence, and the fear of a signal that comes too late. By 1944, radar coverage spans the Pacific Theater. From Adak to Tarawa, from Midway to the Marshalls, the United States now sees what once approached unseen. The early warning time for incoming raids, once 0, is now up to an hour. In the language of radar, an hour is an eternity. Yet the human element remains fragile. Systems jam, wires corrode, power lines burn in tropical storms. Sometimes the warning chain breaks. Sometimes the echo lies. And still, they sit, hands on dials, eyes on shadows, listening for the whisper of another fleet that might come out of the dark. The war has changed form. No longer fought only by steel and gunpowder, it now depends on electrons, frequencies, and human endurance. The sky has become a circuit. And every pulse, every echo, every flicker on the glass is a heartbeat in that circuit, one that might stop at any second. 1944. The Pacific nights are no longer black, they flicker with invisible light. Radar, once chained to bunkers and islands, has taken flight. It now rides on wings. The U.S. Navy begins installing airborne radar sets, the N/APS-4 and the AIMK, 4 compact systems small enough to fit inside the nose of a fighter or under the belly of a bomber. Each weighs nearly 200 pounds, built around vacuum tubes that glow like embers in the dark, feeding on 28 volts from the plane's generator. The first aircraft to carry these eyes are the Lockheed P-70, the F-6F-5N Hellcat, and the PV-1 Ventura, night fighters built for hunting shadows. Their operators sit behind thick glass, watching a round green scope no wider than a dinner plate. The screen pulses once every second, a heartbeat of electricity. Every sweep tells a story. A peak of light means an enemy, a ghost, or a storm. The men learn to see in static. At first, they don't trust it. The beam doesn't show wings or markings, only range and bearing. But once they learn the rhythm, the radar becomes instinct. A controller on the ground calls out, "Contact, 080, range 30. The pilot tilts into the dark, engine roaring at 1,200 horsepower. The blip moves, the radar operator whispers, 20 miles, closing 10. The enemy doesn't know he's already visible, not by eyes, but by wavelength. The N/APS-4 works at 3 GHz, with a wavelength just under 10 centimeters, microwave radar, narrow, precise, and deadly. Its conical skin can detect a bomber at 25 miles, a destroyer at 40, even a periscope at 8. The antenna spins in a small radome, stabilized by gyros. The operator's job: translate ghost into geometry, then geometry into death. At this frequency, radar waves pierce rain and cloud, for the first time in war, weather no longer hides the enemy. The Japanese bombers, the G4M Betty and Ki-49 Helen, still rely on moonlight and silence. But silence no longer protects them. Over the Marianas, a formation flies low, unlit, confident in the night. Then the P-61 Black Widow, the first aircraft designed entirely around radar, finds them. The Widow's SCR-720 radar can detect targets 5 miles ahead, even through heavy cloud. The radar operator sees 2 blips merge, range 2,000 yards, and tells the pilot. Inside the Black Widow, it's claustrophobic. The cockpit glows green, hot air from the power unit vibrates the panels. The pilot can't see anything but static and his instruments. The radar operator controls his mind through the intercom. Every command a whisper in the dark. The bond between them becomes absolute. One sees, the other kills. On carriers, the same revolution unfolds. The F-6F Hellcat night fighters fly with small APS-6 radar pods, allowing interception in total darkness. Controllers aboard the carrier USS Enterprise now guide fighters by radar vectors, creating a new choreography, a ballet of unseen machines over black seas. When the Japanese launch night raids on the fleet, the defenders already know their altitude, bearing, and speed before the enemy sees the horizon. Each kill is mechanical, precise, but also haunting. Many pilots confess they never saw the faces of the men they shot down. They fired at light, at echo, at mathematics. "You didn't kill a plane," one operator wrote. "You erased a signal." The war itself is turning into a battle of frequencies. Japan answers with radar jammers and metallic chaff, strips of aluminum foil, codenamed Jimenshire, meant to blind Allied radar by reflecting false echoes. Engineers counter with filters, Doppler discrimination, and shorter wavelengths. The front line is no longer just ocean or sky, it's bandwidth. In the Pacific, night after night, this invisible war plays out. Pilots return with hands shaking from hours of blind flight, eyes burned from the cathode glow. Ground crews replace tubes, recalibrate oscillators, scrape salt from antennas. The machines are fragile, but the fear of blindness is worse. By mid-1945, radar is everywhere, in planes, ships, submarines, even torpedoes. The ocean itself has become an electric web. The old kind of war, the one of searchlights, binoculars, and sound, is dead. Now men fight by reading ghosts. And in that transformation lies the real horror. Once you learn to kill by light that no one else can see, you never truly see the world the same way again. 1945. The war is ending, but the machines keep listening. Across the Pacific, radar stations still hum, giant antennas turning under gray skies, sending pulses that bounce off an enemy that no longer exists. The Japanese Empire is in ruins, but the echo never stops. What began as a desperate defense system has become something else, a network that can see beyond the horizon, beyond the present. On the volcanic ridges of Okinawa, U.S. engineers erect the SCR-270D, the latest evolution of the radar that once warned of Pearl Harbor. Its dish spans over 30 feet, its transmitter peaks at 100 kilowatts. It scans 360 degrees, capable of detecting aircraft at 250 miles and surface ships at nearly 100. Every sweep lights the dark sky with invisible precision. The operators call it the heartbeat of the island. Inside the concrete bunkers, the sound is constant, a low, electrical murmur that fills every wall. Technicians monitor the cathode screens, their faces ghostly green. When the sweep crosses a target, a thin spike rises on the oscilloscope. It's nothing more than a flash of light, but to the men here, it means life or death. They still flinch at the sound of every signal, conditioned by years of war. Now, the threat has reversed. Instead of hunting enemy fleets, the radar tracks incoming B-29 superfortresses heading toward Japan, friendly ghosts, carrying 10 tons of fire each. The network of radar stations stretching from Saipan to Iwo Jima feeds coordinates back to the U.S. 20th Air Force. For the first time in military history, entire bombing campaigns are synchronized not by human scouts, but by electromagnetic vision. The operators see the returning waves of the Pacific in patterns, dots for planes, streaks for storms, interference from distant thunder. As Japan burns under the nightly raids, its own radar units, the Type 2 Mark II Model 1 and the Tachi-18, struggle in silence. Their maximum range barely reaches 70 miles. Their calibration drifts with temperature. Their vacuum tubes overheat in the humid air. Engineers try to improvise, mounting sets on cliffs, tuning frequencies to evade jamming. But American countermeasures flood the spectrum: window chaff, frequency hopping, radar deception. The Japanese screens fill with false ghosts. Some operators, exhausted and half-blind, begin firing at echoes that don't exist. In the skies above Tokyo, B-29 crews watch their own radar scopes, and /APQ-13 ground mapping systems that paint the Earth in ghostly outlines. Cities appear as bright masses, rivers as black scars. The bombardiers no longer need to see targets. They can navigate and strike through clouds, smoke, and night. The decision to bomb is no longer human eyesight, it's an electrical impulse. One pilot writes in his log, "You don't see Japan anymore. You see a pulse that tells you where to drop." By August, radar has rewritten the geometry of war. With the deployment of N/TPS-10 mobile radar units, entire islands can be mapped, fleets guided, and nuclear missions tracked in real time. When the Enola Gay lifts off from Tinian on August 6, 1945, a chain of radar posts watches her cross the Pacific sky, each one recording a faint echo of the aircraft carrying the first atomic bomb. None of the operators know what they are truly watching. They just log the altitude, bearing, and speed, and wait for the next contact that never comes. When the mushroom cloud rises over Hiroshima, every radar station in the Western Pacific records a signal distortion, a static surge, a blinding arc on the screens. The technicians note it mechanically, unaware that they've just witnessed the birth of a new kind of silence. After Japan's surrender, radar installations remain active. The Pacific becomes a continent of antennas, and the American Navy begins something new: air defense early warning. The same radar that once saw Japan coming now watches the Soviet Far East. Engineers begin adapting the technology for permanent coastal networks, the early prototypes of what will become NORAD. The line between war and peace starts to blur. Veterans of the radar corps struggle to adjust. They wake at night, hearing phantom pulses in the dark. Some keep miniature radar screens in their basements, unable to let go of the sound. "It's strange," one writes, "but silence now feels dangerous." The Cold War begins not with guns, but with echoes. The radar that saw across the ocean has made the world smaller, and infinitely more afraid. Where once the sky was an unknown, it is now a constant map of possible threats. The eye that once saved lives refuses to close. By the late 1940s, new systems, N/FPS-3, LORAN, and DW line prototypes, emerge from wartime designs. The US can now track any approach across the Pacific within minutes. The invisible empire built from fear outlives the one built from conquest. In the end, radar did more than let America see Japan coming. It changed how humanity sees everything, turning the night sky from mystery into data, and replacing the fear of what's out there with the fear of what we might find. The screen still hums, green light still sweeping in circles. Somewhere, a blip appears, faint, distant, 300 miles away. The operator leans forward, hand on the dial. The echo returns. If this episode sent chills down your spine, hit the like button. Tell us in the comments what struck you the most, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because this is only the beginning of a long journey into the darkest pages of history.